Welcome to Self Perfected.
Let's go.
Product placement.
I wanted it to start like
Drake,
this.
I think you're live again on your page.
There's no way.
Drake, I just
Hello,
think you're
everybody.
alive, man. You've been living it
Welcome.
up recently.
Okay.
Live and
Welcome
and
to our
You're
technical
right.
difficulties.
welcome to our technical difficulties.
Is it live on Facebook? Is it live on the
It's
No,
live
I
and
got it.
self-perfected.
It's like,
It is.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever done
You're right.
Zoom
I
with
saw
an old person who doesn't know what they're doing? It's so funny.
it's a little bit like what we just experienced.
Exactly.
Did-
Can you see me? How come I can see me? I can see
Let me
me.
ask y'all a question. Let me ask y'all a question.
What's up?
No, maybe I know the answer. How often, just I don't know.
You should just leave it as a cliffhanger. That'd be so fun.
Just the qualitative. I want the gestalt. How often prior to like doing Zoom type meetings, okay, like like video conferencing type stuff, how often did you answer your phone and be like, can you hear me? Okay, yes, I can hear you. And then they say, okay, can you hear me? Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah. Okay, you still hear me? Okay. Like how often did you have that conversation like that on the phone?
I
I don't know if you,
think
I don't know
very
if you do
often.
now.
No.
Oh,
I had
it was
that
really
conversation a
only
lot.
since I moved to the country.
I have. Oh yeah, maybe that's part of it too.
I think I
did-
have it.
I didn't
now.
control for that variable.
I have it now, but like sometimes, if I'm like at certain spots of where we live, it's like the reception is
Yeah.
terrible. So
And if there's
I
a
was just thinking it's
hurricane,
because like when you're on the video, I think it's normal to be like, okay, how's my audio? Okay, can you hear me? Because it's it has to connect.
yeah,
But on
yeah.
a phone, you just like it should be like that. But now I find myself asking that a lot more on the phone of like, can you hear me? Okay, because I never would have asked that before. I don't think.
How
You know,
often?
and some of
did
it's
you-
reception.
How often did you FaceTime somebody like before, like Zoom was pretty
Before the internet?
ubiquitous? Yeah. How often did you FaceTime before the internet? Was it every day? Because I wasn't doing that.
I wasn't FaceTiming.
Me neither.
The only people I really FaceTime though now is like the kids. Sometimes Avery because I'm showing
Yeah.
them something.
Those are the only people
kids-
I really FaceTime.
The kids
too.
love to FaceTime.
I only FaceTime.
You guys, I gotta show you this. This is funny. I was out with one of our contractors yesterday. We were working on something, and Max texted me. I didn't see the text, otherwise I would have responded, but it was just in my pocket and I was focused, right? And so I won't show you the whole thing, but it says, let's see. Come on. Focus. It says, hi, it's Max. Where are you? Is it backwards for you guys or just
No,
me?
we can see it.
Yes, my fingers are dirty. Yeah, I was changing
That's
the oil
so
on the
fun.
tractor. Hi, Max. Where are you? It's backwards.
Hurry up, or I will send
Hurry up,
random
or-
letters to you. Okay, done with waiting.
And then it's like it keeps doing that. And then look, it says, please, because he wants me to call him. And then it gets to the end and it says,
Can I call you? Bunch of random letters. Sorry.
sorry. I thought that was so funny because then finally he came out and he goes, Cameron, I was texting you random letters. Why weren't you answering me? And I was like, oh, I didn't even notice. I looked at it and I just started laughing. It's funny when your 5 and your 3-year-old can actually text and read. You know what I mean? Like they can both read anything. Like if I'm on my phone, they'll be like, why does it say that?
Yeah.
You know,
Dude,
What a
they can
combo.
both read it.
I don't think that I've told you this yet, but I showed that video of Max doing like 4th grade math to a 9-year-old, right? And I was just seeing, can you do this? Can you do 4th grade math, right? And the conversation started because I was telling her how, how like Max, when he was 2, before he was 2, he recognized all his letters and numbers. And she was like, whoa, that's genius. She's 9 years old and she's like recognizing that that's already advanced, right? And then I was like, yeah, now he's like 5, he's doing 4th grade math. She's like what kind of problems? I was like, well, let's see if you can do them. And so we watched the video together and I paused it and like, I was just like, okay, so what do you think the answer is? And she's like, lost, completely lost. I'm like, okay. And you know how Katie's like, Ashley and her 4 friends, how many is that? And Max is immediately 5, right? I asked her before we get to that part, I'm like, Ashley and her 4 friends, how many is that? And she's like, 4. I'm like, Ashley and her 4 friends. She's like, yeah, 4. I was like, okay, play the video. Max is 5. She's like, 5? How is it 5? 5. Oh, this kid's smarter than me. That's
So it's interesting because in the video, when Katie said Ashley and her 4 friends, and she was doing this, holding 4, right?
yeah,
And she was like, she just before she would do it, she was like, how many is that? Max was like 5.
yeah.
Like it wasn't even like a
He didn't have
It
to
was
think
like-
about it. Yeah, yeah. It's automatic. And I just thought that was really interesting because she couldn't get past like the first stages of the question. And Max was able to work through it, really simply, and just seeing that showed like, oh, it's not just something that they're saying in an article. Like, yeah, kids in 4th grade, they're having a hard time with 4th grade math. Like I can see it firsthand. It's a 9-year-old who is in 4th grade, essentially. And I'm like, oh, like you can't even get the basics of how to construct this problem. And then when I was saying 4/5, she's like, okay, 4/5. So like 20? I was like, well, 4/5, like not a whole bag, but 4/5 of a bag. And she's like, oh, okay. So like there's 4 of them, they have 4/5. It's got to be maybe 30. and then she was going based off of like there's 4 friends. And then when Max said 5, she's like, oh, so it's got to be more than 30. It's got to be like 40. 40 is how many bags they got all together. And I'm like, whoa, okay, so none of this is actually computing on that level. But I just wanted to share that because just seeing firsthand like what the contrast is from this 5-year-old using TechnoTutor to and I would say this is a smarter than average 9-year-old today. It wasn't like she was dumb or
like the way she communicates and
Exactly.
thinks about stuff.
exactly smarter than average. And I'm like, whoa, okay, that is, I was kind of almost expecting her to like be able to get it right away, but just be impressed that a 5-year-old could do it. You know what I mean?
Abandon all hope, Drake. You underestimate the system.
Well, she
I'm-
is homeschooled, right, Drake?
She is. And
Well,
so, that's why I was
thing
kind of
you're
expecting more
helping
from her. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, good thing that like you're building out the network there with everything you're doing with the tutoring and the daycares because yeah, it's just common. Like I've been listening to a lot of John Taylor Gatto recently. And
Tell us
oh
about
man.
that,
Yeah, he's so for anyone who doesn't know, he was a school teacher in Harlem, New York. And he for many years, decades. And over time, he won the New York City and New York State Teacher of the Year multiple times because of his approach to learning and educating kids. And he has some interesting stuff. So he's from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. But when he went into Harlem in the schools, because he had thought that, oh, Pittsburgh is like behind because New York is this intellectual capital of the US and the world and all this. And he was saying that what they were learning in 8th grade in Pittsburgh, what they were learning in 3rd grade in Pittsburgh is what they were teaching the 8th graders in New York. So the 3rd graders in Pittsburgh, like basic stuff, that's what the 8th grade curriculum was in Harlem. And so Gatto eventually was like, okay, scrap this. And he just took a totally new approach. And he was teaching the kids like, advanced, what we would consider advanced literature, which is just normal if you're from the elite or if you were here, before the schooling system.
like talking about stuff just as if they could understand at a higher
Yeah.
level. Right?
Yeah. And he was just, he got phenomenal results and he took the education piece to be very practical. So he wanted different lessons to happen where, for example, the kids, as they would go through his year with him, would have walked like every block of the Manhattan Island, from doing various projects and things. But I mean, think about how cool of a realization that is as a kid to realize, hey, I don't need a bus. I don't need a car. I can do this on foot. Not saying that like now you would just not do that, but it's like, it's a cool sense of like what you're capable of. And so obviously, John Taylor Gatto could only do so much because he was in the school system. And he didn't see, I mean, he didn't have access to technical, he's passed away, but his approach to learning was very much challenging the system. And I was listening to him. He had one interview with Alex Jones. He had another one called Examples of Highly Educated People. You can find it all on YouTube. His whole 5-hour underground history lesson is phenomenal. I've listened to that thing a few times now because he just,
have you ever
so
heard
well
the
read.
one where he's on C-SPAN?
No, I don't think so.
I'll send you that one later. Like, there's different names of it. One of them on YouTube, it's called like "Why Do Kids Shoot Up Schools?"
Yeah.
And
Oh,
he's
so
not only
that's all
talking
in my
about that,
queue.
but
I have a
Okay.
a list of probably
that one is really good too.
Yeah.
It's his most like focused one where he's not meandering. It's like a very focused
Yeah.
talk. Like
He meanders a bit,
really good.
but
Yeah,
but
I mean, it's good because he gives lots of context. But
right.
yeah,
He's so well read. And so what I found really fascinating about this is, I mean, him and I know Alex Jones is a bit much for some people, but they both have, independently done their research and came to the same conclusions from like reading the original works by Charles Darwin. Like, people think Charles Darwin was just this, scientist who just, was great at sketching stuff and he put together these theories. It's like he was an heir to a fortune, and he was basically tasked with put together a theory about nature, so survival of the fittest, whatever, that then reinforces that this belief that the elite have had for thousands and thousands of years, which basically justifies there should be 1% or even less than 1% at the top that understand what's really going on. They're the superior, and everyone else is basically useless and just they need to be tamed, because the average person cannot be trusted because they have impulses, they could kill people, they could go out of control. And so that was the whole premise behind everything that Darwin put together. And it's literally in his books. It's not, but now you see, what, tying this into what Drake is saying, that this is a 9-year-old girl who's maybe even smarter than the average 9-year-old girl, and she can't do basic math. If that's the level of intelligence of the average kid, how the hell are they going to pick up or even know to pick up the work of Charles Darwin?
Right.
Or there's like a whole web of these people that are, kind of the shapers of modern thought. Of, we just hear survival of the fittest. Oh yeah, science, of course. Trust the hashtag trust the science, right?
It's so
And it's
funny.
like literally that. So that's what the science is saying.
It's so funny because when I went to university, I went and did a science degree. And this was when I was like, okay, screw religion, because I just went to a Catholic school. And then I chose science. I was like, I'm going to study science because I was interested in naturopathy and human biology. And literally my first course was like as an evolution or ecology course. And the professor was like, if anyone here is a creationist, I'm sorry to say, but you'll probably get offended by what I say because we are focused on evolution. And one of the books that I was told to read was Why Evolution Was True. And I remember getting so like wrapped up in this, like, see, like, this is why creationism is like just like a fairy tale. It's just a story. Like, it has no basis in like actual scientific, fact or anything. And just looking at myself back then and being like, wow, like I was completely immersed and just like brainwashed into this ideology and thinking like, oh, Darwin was so cool. I remember having The Origin of Species and like wanting to read that book, way too high vocabulary for like what I was capable at that time. But it was just crazy because I'm looking back and I was like, I got impulsed with so much crap that like now I'm, able to actually like discern and realize like, wow, everything was just like part of the system to make you think a certain way and to just accept things the way that they are, right? And versus like actually questioning anything. But at the same time, it's like you're not like taught how to question things. So it's like, well, I'm just going to accept. And then just through my own like kind of realizing like, wow, whatever I've been taught is just so not aligned with reality. Like I'm still so lost and not sure what to do. Like that's then what led me to like, okay, I need to question further, which led me down a different path. But it's just so crazy, like what you're saying, because it's like, it's literally you're put into the school system and then you like get shut out into the real world, and it has no basis for like, okay, how do I actually be successful, and how is this information even useful, right?
Yeah.
So
I had a similar thing because I got through school and I knew how to game the system enough, so I got like decent grades. But I was just like depressed and anxious and just like hated everything. I was like, let me just get to the weekend so I can party and
Right.
try and find meaning. And I took one class in high school that was in psychology, and that's when I first learned about the idea of like your brain has dopamine and serotonin. I was like, oh, maybe this is why I'm so depressed. There's like something in my brain. And
Mm.
so that was then like the little bit where I was like, oh, I should study psychology. So then when I got my degree in psychology, right, graduated with honors and all this stuff, and it's like I knew nothing. It's like maybe a few theories, and you learn about like the basics of operant conditioning, like, oh, if you give people a reward every time is different than if you randomly give them a reward. I was like, huh, like maybe that's why I like partying with my friends. But it's like there's no basis in practicality. And I mean, it is engineered that way. It's absolutely engineered that way.
And that's
Carnegie's
4 years.
Yeah, 4 years
Yeah.
at a not cheap university.
What if you
Right.
just had the vocabulary and like within a few months you read like actually BF Skinner's books and you read,
I
you know,
know.
John
You go to the
Piaget
source.
and you read like all the freaking stuff yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You,
So
you,
true.
you have a totally different, and it wouldn't be in a curriculum format, because the problem with that curriculum format is it like presents it as if this is what it is, when in reality it's just a survey of some of the things that have been said. It's not everything.
Yeah.
You know, like you take a course on how the world was created, you're not going to hear the creation part necessarily. You know what I mean? So you're only going to hear, and even if you hear creationism, when you hear that word, what does everyone automatically think? You think Christians,
Christians, God, all that.
Right.
Yes, God, Genesis. You don't think of like the fucking, Dead Sea Scrolls where they talk about like the archons and like,
Right.
there's this whole theory where it's like they had this pipette that they put into like the spiral arm of the galaxy and seeded it with life. And
Wow.
like it was like the galaxy was like a laboratory experiment of these alien beings. Like there's all these other like theories
Yeah.
out there of
Theories,
like,
yeah.
Cool.
like ancient like fucking stuff,
Well,
you know?
So that was so fascinating to me too, because I had a similar thing where then I'm like questioning everything, and I had started to look at like, okay, well, besides Christianity, what else is there? And I'm like reading Buddhism and all this stuff, but then I came across Gnosticism, and this really
Is that
interesting.
Nazism?
No.
Okay.
Gnosticism with a G.
My interest.
Cameron,
in
you
encyclopedia.
classic white male, Cameron. Wow. I'm ashamed to be a white male. Just kidding.
Welcome to my
Okay.
world.
So not Gnosticism, at least one of the main branches of, I learned this from Graham Hancock. He was talking about how their theory was that the God of the Old Testament, as they call him Yahweh, was actually not a good, benevolent God. He was a evil God that demanded this like worship. And so it's this like alternative way of looking at how do you reconcile the story of there was this God and he created Adam and Eve, and then he like banishes Adam and Eve from this garden, and there's the serpent and everything, and they talk about the fruit of the tree of life and fruit of the tree of knowledge. I was like, whoa, wait, you're telling me this thing could be in reverse? Like that's pretty fat. That would actually explain a little bit more why the world is so messed up.
Yeah.
And that love has not solved any of my problems yet. It's not to then throw out like everything in Christianity. Like I found the message of Jesus pretty practical. Love your neighbors, you love yourself. But yeah, why is there this God in the Old Testament that's saying that, Cain or Abel, one of them's got to sacrifice their child?
No,
And
that's
then-
Abraham.
Yeah. And then you start looking at like, then I saw Zeitgeist. Oh, then that messed me up so bad.
Yeah.
Oh, did y'all see Zeitgeist?
Yeah.
The original?
Yeah.
All of a sudden it's talking about, I mean, we'll get to 9/11 in a moment, it is the anniversary, but the part about where they talk about Jesus and the story of Jesus is throughout like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other ancient texts. And there's like this whole alignment with like astrology and like the 3 days and the time of the year and Easter. And I'm like, wow. Well, I mean, let's even say that the Jesus story like is real. It's like, well, then what does that mean about reality? If there's an alignment between like these stories and the people and like the bigger picture. And I was like, wow, this is cool.
Well,
but
what if it's more like Jesus was real and it was a real point? Because like you study destiny, all that is put into context. But the whole point about him being the son of God the blah blah blah, that is taking the myths and putting it onto it.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? Like that part's not real. Any of that stuff is not real. It's just taking the myths and just passing it on to form it into, it's like, imagine like you did something that would have woke people up. And in order to prevent that, they're able to take what you did and then put it into a myth that controls the mind into the story they want it to be.
It's
Put
almost
all the right elements in.
it's almost like taking all of like the fables, like all of Aesop's fables, and like all of like any kind of story that was just kind of out there that was told verbally, and you'd get like a one-off of this story, and then like putting them all together, and then just like and this all fits into this one character, and then like just
and then
shipping
you
that
follow the character, and that's and like the story around that and the meaning of it and the direction of it, that becomes what you focus on and then you live that out.
Yeah.
It's a hero worship rather than the actual point. Because like when you look at Jesus, it's really clear when you just strip away all the obvious bullshit stuff. Think about it. Ancient Rome, like society was collapsing, civilization was collapsing. There was like all these like slave wars and revolts from the middle class and all this stuff going on, transgender, non-binary, like all this stuff, right? It was literally the same kind of stuff.
It's literally happening in ancient Rome.
and somebody was like, look, we need to create a system that's best for everybody.
Yeah.
And then who was it that actually came against him? Because they try to put it on the Jews or like the Pharisees or whoever, right? But it was like the system was like, no, we can't allow this message to be spread. Like this is not, I mean, and it's not even like it was a necessarily, I'm not saying it was a conspiracy where they got together, we got to stop this message. It's just that's what the system does in response to stuff like that.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like anytime someone challenges something, like look what happened with Trump. It's like the system just suddenly goes against it. It's like it's able to identify. You know, it's like when you see like when you have animals, like if there's a chicken that's sick, the other animals will like shun it and peck it and stuff like that. It's like they know. You know what I mean? It's like something within they can tell.
That's like those ants that that fungus gets on them. What's that fungus called? What's that called, Christine?
I don't know, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, but like that fungus gets on them. It's a mushroom of some sort.
Yeah.
What was
one that
it?
controls their mind.
Cordyceps?
Cordyceps, there it is. Thanks. I need now. So like whenever they get infected with cordyceps, the other ants will literally carry it out of their anthill or wherever they are and like away, as far away as possible, and just abandon it there, because they know if that thing like explodes within their ant hive, they're all fucked. It's really interesting.
So now like for the more newcomer people, I see how then they could be like, wait, you mean the system like does that? Like the system's this aware entity? And then people I think can go into like a mysticism about it. So then like how does one now reconcile understanding that yes, the system will push back always? I mean, I know it's because starting point of the system, but then reconciling that with then changing the system so it's actually best for everyone.
It's just like
but
what
it's
makes you
mechanical though. It's not mystical. It's like when if you have air in a balloon and you open the balloon, like the air automatically goes out. It's just because that's the laws of physics. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's the way the relationships are designed. It's not like there's some, and even by calling it an entity, it's like we're an entity. A company is an entity. I mean, think about it. Like a corporation like McDonald's does things, and there's people in the entity, and you can replace them. And if you take the CEO out of McDonald's and put him in another company, that person will suddenly be against McDonald's. Yeah.
Yeah.
But before, they would have done everything they could to make McDonald's successful. So if you replace all the people from one company to the other company, what's going to happen?
The system is going to revolt against that original company.
No, but what I'm saying is you take Pepsi and Coca-Cola, you take all those executives and you switch them. Suddenly they're going to be doing the opposite of what they were doing before. So there's an entity, which is the corporation itself. It has its own. I'm not saying it's a living being. I'm just saying it is an entity that, and it's a system because it's relationships. So when they get into that position, it's like, okay, I am now the CEO of this company, and I have a relationship to the manager and to the production supply chain and this and that and whatever. And then those relationships are what's holding it together. If they literally went to the courthouse and were like, we're dissolving the company, everybody would just be like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'll go away now. Like suddenly everything would stop because it's just it's relationships based on words.
It's really interesting if you think about it in the context of like computers and programs, and like, you know, you have the same characters that you're using, and even in different programming languages, like there's only so many characters that you can use to write a program, right? But depending on how you put those characters together will construct a different language and different I guess tasks that would be performed, right? But like the contents of the language itself would be the same, meaning the people would be the same, but just the context of the I guess task that you want executed, let's say, would be different, right? And that's essentially like the entity is like, here is the task that needs to be completed for this company or whatever it is, right? And then you have the contents, meaning all the people who could actually make that happen, being replaceable in essence.
And really it's like, if you do the task, here's a reward, here's some money.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone's going in there. It's not like they're thinking of it themselves. They're going in there saying, I will get money if I complete these tasks. So that's how the system works. So when you think about it, everybody who is going against like a Jesus or somebody, they're all in a position, and their survival at some level is taken care of by being in that position. So they'll automatically fulfill the role of that position in order to keep the security of it. Mm-hmm. If they were to be fired and then not have that job anymore, they probably wouldn't care. You know, and I mean, obviously there's a certain level where they start to buy into it because you can't deal with the cognitive dissonance every day of realizing it, right? That's why people tend to wake up, is like they can't deal with that cognitive dissonance anymore, and they just eventually like, I have to make a choice. You know, and that's what happened to me when I was younger. Actually, it was around the time of not around 9/11, but around the time of me looking into that stuff, you know, like all the conspiracy quote theories and all that stuff about it, that I really started to be like, okay, the cognitive dissonance is too high. I have to make a choice. Are things the way I've always thought and felt they were, which was very limited, and it was all just about me and how I felt about my life and my ideas of what I'm supposed to do in my life.
Yeah.
But then suddenly my conception of the world expanded outside of myself only. And that was really like the whole 9/11. It's kind of interesting if you think about it. Like, can you think of any other event in history? I'm thinking the only other one I could probably think of would be like JFK. Mm-hmm. You know, that like has that kind of effect of getting you to question things. I mean, and even JFK, like I think probably back then, not even a lot of people really questioned it. I don't know. I wasn't there. I can't really say, but there wasn't the internet.
Yeah.
It was like, you'd have to get hold of like a secret VHS tape or something, you know, like, I don't even know how you.
Interesting. I was, because when the pandemic started, I was like telling my parents, like you realize there's, I would say arguably a majority of people are still very hesitant and like questioning this thing. And my mom's always like interested. So she's like, what do you mean? She watches the news and stuff. And I was like, look, like there are many people who think Bill Gates and Anthony Fauci and all these people, they're orchestrating this for a bigger purpose to make profit from it and all that. And my dad brought up, he's like, yeah, well, you know, when I was younger, I do remember like I questioned the moon landing and I questioned like JFK and, you know, all the conspiracies. But then he's like, yeah, but then, you know, at just one point I just didn't. And it's like this fascinating thing where, because the system's so deep and he didn't have the tools of change, it was like you could question it and maybe even get some proof here and there, but then the system just boom, you know. And by that time,
I meant about that choice, it's like the cognitive dissonance is there, and you're like, okay, I have to choose to either see where this leads me, or I have to just suppress it and be like, you know what? It doesn't matter. I got to fit into the system. And I remember when I had that existential crisis when I was younger, and I went to different family members and I was like, why do you do what you do? And I remember talking to my biological father and being like, you know, just kind of like, why do you do what you do? Like, what's your rationale behind it? And he was just like, you know, I fit into, he was like, he said it like kind of like a cog in a wheel or cog in the system or something like that. Like, he literally said it like that. Like I have played my part in the machine or whatever, you know, like that was the rational. And I mean, that is the truth. So it's like you get to that point, whether you ever get to that point or not, the people who do, you get to this point and you're like, okay, I'm going to just accept I'm just a cog in the machine, or I am, but I'm going to question this machine and see why is it designed the way it is, and what's going on here, and why do we have to play these roles? And like, that's kind of the path
Right.
that I decided to go on.
It's
And,
so
like-
meta that he would say it that way. You know, like it's
But
so,
I know, but it was just like, it was like the program speaking, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
well, I'm a cog in the machine.
Well, it's
What are you asking me?
it's
It's like
so
you're talking to your wrench. Like, what are you? It's like, I am a wrench. I twist
You're
things, right?
but like you see how, especially with people that, let's say they have a higher position in the system, they almost say it with like a sense of pride, like, yeah, we create jobs for people, and like, we provide goods, or like with like farmers, for example. It's like, hey, we're here to feed the world, right? But it's like it's such like a little narrow myopic view of things, because when you look at the bigger picture of like, okay, feeding the world, well, one, with what? Two, at what cost? And it, like, I've been researching a lot recently of regenerative agriculture, because I'm just skeptical of the supply chain, and we're growing our food and sort of making like compost and things like that, and I don't go crazy into it, but it's like, every once in a while I'll like listen to that kind of thing, because I find really cool analogies between like the ecosystem within a garden, for example, and then the greater economy and how that affects the supply chain. And the level of insanity of how some of these farmers have set up their operation is just completely on your corn and soybeans, where most of it is just turned into either cattle feed or ethanol. And it's like straight just raping the land. Like, you plant corn over and over and over. The pellets, it's fascinating because Jessica's family, her dad's still farmer, her brother's farmer. Her brother is looking at more of a regenerative approach, which is kind of cool. But I mean, I remember seeing these pellets of corn, and they're like bright orange and bright blue, because they're literally created with all these chemical fertilizers and all that stuff in it. And then it's planted. And it's so ridiculous because like
Should have been
here,
using candy corn.
yeah, it looked beyond candy. It looked like some radioactive shit. And
I have
it's
these
like-
magic beans.
it's like that. It's like a fairy tale, but like a fucked fairy tale. Well, they're all fucked. But I remember that it didn't rain for a while here, and Jessica would point this out to me because she like has vocabulary, but because she grew up in it, she's like, look, these fields, they don't have watering systems. She's like, sure enough, they'll grow, and sure enough, the things grow. There's like no, I don't know how it works. But the insanity is so obvious now if you're really looking for it, and you can see how unsustainable the system is, and it's collapsing in front of our eyes, and it's going to affect every single person,
See,
even the people in the
another-
gated communities.
Yeah. Even another perfect example of that, of like we're talking about the McDonald's example or something. It's like the farmers are just the workers in the company of McDonald's, but it's just in the company of the entire economic world system. So they're not really deciding per se what to do. And then now, especially, it's really obvious, the more and more people are like, well, I'm going to do these alternative things that are actually best. The system is like, we're going to shut you down because you're not doing it according to our regulations, and you have to be certified, and therefore you have to use this or that. And so they'll make it where you have to do it that way.
Yeah.
Otherwise you're ostracized from the system, or you're shut down, or whatever the case is. There's been a lot of cases like that recently, especially.
That's why everyone's going to have to join us, whether they want to or not. Because, like, for example, there's this guy, Gabe Brown. He's in North Dakota, which is close to where I live. And he's had a pretty fascinating experience where he did the whole standard system farming, and they had like a bunch of hail come through, and just year after year is bad. And at one point he's like, screw this, I'm just going to get cattle. It reminded me of Jim in Texas, how he has like it's like you can literally just have cattle, and then they go through the field, and then their manure, and then you got like chickens go through, and then you plant. And it's like this fairly comprehensive system, but and it makes sense, right? It's in accordance with life. But then, like, I've seen these, Amish farmers and different people that have alternative approaches like this, all of a sudden they're getting either raided, or the regulations are being pushed on it. And so even
Because they're trying to sell it to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And the system's like, no, you know, it's like McDonald's trying to fight Pepsi, and finally McDonald's is like, or not McDonald's, you know what I mean, Pepsi, whatever, Pepsi and Coca-Cola, like, finally they're like way out competed them, and that's like, now we're going to destroy you. There
Right.
can't be two. There's got to be only one. That's got to be in their mind, in the mind of the system. You know,
Yeah.
But the other problem, this is why you can't be isolationist.
Right.
You know, and a lot of what I see is people will go into a sort of survival mentality of like, well, I guess I just gotta. That's like why you said earlier, you're not going crazy about all the regenerative stuff, because it's like you and I know, like same here, like we have a cow, we have some things, it's all for ourselves, but the reality of replacing everything we do, everything we buy from the store with all of that would require so much focus. And I'm not saying it can't be done. It's just all of my focus would have to be on that, on just my survival and my family's survival.
Right.
Okay, let's say we survive. Then what world are my kids going to be living in?
Exactly. It's like,
Because
it's
then
like
the
the
moment they
point.
step out of our property, they're in fucking like meta world. You know what I mean? Like, is that what I want to allow? You know, and like, oh, we'll just isolate and go live in the mountains. And it's like, you have to understand, Bill Gates doesn't want some of the farmland. He
Right.
wants all of it. And I'm using him as a metaphor in a sense for like the entire system. They don't want some of it. They want all of it, and they will come and take it. Like, there is no safe spot. Like, eventually every part of the earth must be covered with a 5G tower or what the fuck ever. Like, if your barn is in the way of the signal, like, they'll have it removed. So it's like, we can't go into I'm just here to survive and take care of my family.
Right. It's such
Okay,
such
how-
bullshit.
Because then it's like, okay, let's just pretend like you think that way for a moment. Then you have a bunch of kids, right? And how are they gonna multiply? There needs to be another family,
Yeah.
and then they have to multiply. So there has to be a society outside of just your little survivalist mentality. And if you
You're
think,
like, dang
well,
it,
we'll just make
I
our own
forgot about
city."
inbreeding. Like, we
It's
can't
like,
do
it's
that.
like saying you'll
shit.
make your own city. It's like, well, now you're competing with the system. Like, if it's just
Right.
you and your family, maybe I could say you could rationalize they'll leave you alone. But your kids, they're not gonna have their own families outside of your family. So then you can see like you don't actually want that. You're just thinking. This is really the mindset is, the world's collapsing. It's all going to hell. I'm just going to try to be comfortable until it collapses. That's the actual pattern that the person's participating in.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, and they're thinking that they're going to rise from the ashes and it's all going to collapse. And then but that's not really what's happening. It's just going to more and more control.
Mhm.
You know, that's not the fucking world I want to leave to my kids.
Yeah.
Right. Right. It's like the point of equilibrium is like, create the best possible setup for yourself, and at the same time create the best possible setup. More in terms of like locally, right? So you got like the cows and the animals and stuff, and that's what we have here too. But we're not so
All of
Yeah,
that is cool
isolated.
and can be done.
Mhm.
It's just that if we also don't solve the problem of the bigger picture, the bigger
Exactly.
system, the average person, the masses, like, if that problem is not solved, I mean, you're fucked. Because like there's these gigantic entities of corporations and nations and so forth, and governments like that actually have all the power because they have the masses of people behind them actually. And it all comes
Yeah.
down to education. Like, you know, like Christine was talking about wanting to read like Origin of the Species and all that stuff. Like, why didn't we read that stuff in school? Can you imagine like if you were in fourth grade and they were like, we're going to read Origin of the Species, and that's going to be fourth grade biology or
I know.
whatever.
And now literally, what is the class filled with? What gender are you? And every month we're going to go around and make sure we have your gender up to date so you feel
Yeah.
comfortable.
But
Like,
you're
that's
given
the
like
most
a
important thing.
synopsis. You're given a synopsis of Origin of the Species, survival of the fittest. That's all you need to know. Charles Darwin.
You're not
great.
really even given a synopsis though. You're given the extrapolation they want you to have about
Right.
it. It's just like with World War II. You study like some random battles and stuff, but you're never really looked at everything in total context.
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
true.
You know what I
That-
mean? Like when you study World War II, did they tell you that Hitler printed $1 billion to give to people to like work and rebuild Germany?
No, they don't tell you that.
I don't remember hearing anything about that.
No.
They tell you
Do you know
why
what I mean? Like-
Japan entered the war.
Like, no, they never see what I'm
Do
saying.
they
Like,
teach
just
you
give
about
the
false
little
flag
points.
operations?
Right. They just tell you enough to give you the general, it's like the track they want your mind to follow.
Yeah.
You know, and so same thing with like, so it's like, is it a synopsis or is it just like, oh, you know, we're not going to tell you about the elite part and like who the fuck Darwin really was and all this other stuff. Like that's why
Right.
the Gatto stuff is so cool, because he kind of gives you the behind the scenes point. That's actually just out there.
Right.
It's interesting because like that's the whole point of a curriculum isn't it? It's just like, it's like almost like uh, a movie director choosing which scenes to include in the movie.
Right.
You know, it's just like, okay, yeah, this is the viewpoint I want you to have. So you watch this movie and you're like, oh, so this is the good guy. Okay, I got it. And
That's
it's like,
okay.
that's so fascinating.
It's okay. It's imagine two different documentaries about the 2020 election.
yeah,
One produced by Trump and one produced by the New York Times.
right. Yeah.
Same clips, same stuff and everything, but you're like totally different outcomes. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh, and you can be convinced by either one.
Right. Right. It's like, imagine watching two documentaries about West Dem and about Pak Piao, right? Like,
Oh, Rick's been listening, or what is that?
that's
Philip K. Dick?
yeah, Philip K. Dick. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I was
Um,
thinking too, because I was listening to John Taylor Gatto's story, because I never really heard his background until Alex Jones interviews him. And because he was like in advertising or whatever. And then he just like got a substitute teacher job. And
Like he was in Manhattan doing like actually like Mad Men style like advertising.
Yeah.
Like yeah.
and
He went to Columbia.
right. And
Yeah.
I'm listening and I was like, this would make for like a fascinating movie. I was like, and then I was like, oh no. I was like, this better not be a movie, because then however it's painted in Hollywood, the system's going to use it to go, oh yeah, and it'll justify school. It'll justify one teacher teaching too many kids, and it'll just totally twist the message. So I was like, maybe though, down the road when we have our media companies, we'll make movies like that, but like actually like, you know, give the full context.
This is the media company right now.
This is it. Yeah.
This is just the beginning.
know.
You can get a lot of context just from this. Go listen to everything that we say and then go research it yourself. Or first, make sure you have Technotutor and then go research the blogs.
Without that,
and then, yeah.
good luck.
But even the point about John Taylor Gatto, like, and it's not a criticism of him. It's just somebody might research that stuff and be like, see, we, like you just said, like we need to have like better teachers that really care and like do like this. And it's like, but
Right. It's not the fucking answer.
like to say that John Taylor Gatto was really successful as a teacher.
Hmm.
First
Would
of
not
all,
be true.
just because he was recognized by the system as the best teacher or whatever, it's like, okay, but who was he got state teacher of the year twice, or teacher of the year once, twice for state, and then for a couple times or 3 times for like city teacher of the year for New York.
Yeah.
And that was like within 3 decades, right? So who else was getting it?
Yeah.
Right.
You know, it's almost like they just throw out this little bone of like, oh, you're doing a great job, you know, because he's got some good reports or whatever. And again, this is not as a criticism of him, but it's almost like he spent a lot of time and then at the end of his life was like, I'm going to expose all of this,
Yeah.
you know, and he even resigned and put a big letter in the New York Times or whatever.
Right.
But even if you were like, okay, he was such a great teacher, how did it affect okay, it's almost like there's this pattern in people of like, see, you could have some poor child in Harlem whose, you know, parents are drug dealers and whatever, and if they just get the right teacher, suddenly they can become a genius, brilliant physicist, you know, like doing all this, a corporate leader. And you're like, okay, maybe that'll happen once in a while, like you'll have a child that'll happen to, but that's most likely not going to happen because you're not directing the first 7 years, like the child's programming, all of that stuff, like all that it showed was if you give a little bit more attention and less on memorization and more about trying to engage the interest in speaking to the children as an adult, they're capable of a lot more. But that should be obvious. But it still is not the best approach because nothing is being directed in the beginning. Imagine if he had a bunch of kids like Max and Seneca in the classroom. Like what, I mean, not that we would put him in a classroom, but like, what could a teacher do with that? But then you might ask, like, why the fuck would they even be in a classroom?
Right.
It'd more just be like a meetup once a month. Be like, hey, everyone, bring your smart kids and we'll do science experiments.
Right. And there's this
together.
guy who like, has some expertise in something and they want to go like be directed by somebody who already has a lot of experience.
Right.
But that's like a whole different, that's not the school system. So it was like, you're seeing this flower in the desert. And you're like, cool, we need to plant more flowers in the desert. And you're like, there's not enough.
You're like, no,
You
we
know, or
need
whatever.
to
You know what I mean? Like, it's
geoengineer
not-
this
it's not how it
desert and make
works.
it rain like they do when you got money.
Are
You
there
can
even
manipulate the
any
weather.
follow-ups of his students? Like, do
You know what I mean? Like it's not like you hear of like the roster of students that he impacted and now they're doing this and this. I'm sure you could find it, but
They like developed
like,
the vaccine for Pfizer.
But I mean, I
it's-
wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised. It's
Yeah.
like that kid, instead of going to, the public high school in Harlem, they got to Harvard and now they're executive at Facebook. It's like, that would be the success story. See, wow, amazing. And it's like,
Yeah.
what other, and I don't know, maybe some of them became entrepreneurs, did creative things, like, but it's still not a systematic point.
Right.
And like, this guy had to go through a long process of his own internal process of like questioning things and so forth. It wasn't like, I mean, now how are you going to systematically replicate that in the schools in Harlem? And that's just one school and one
Right.
school system. Then what about all of New York? And what about all of the Northeast? And what about, how are you going to replicate that? And you're going to get all these teachers. But
Daycare
think about
system,
it.
Techno-tutor.
But you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not going to be through the school system.
Exactly. No, it's good. It's like us.
Yeah. Right.
And
The only way is to support the children individually. And when I
Yeah.
say individually, it doesn't mean that, well, no, I was going to say it doesn't mean that you have like one teacher per child, but it does mean that, because like
Yeah, that would be
parents
best.
the parents are the original teachers, whether they realize it or not. Like,
That would be best.
they are the original teachers.
Especially
And
because
so,
like parents understand like you know when you're working with someone else's kid, they do some weird shit. They do some weird shit that's like, what is going on? Like that can be really baffling and frustrating for a teacher, for sure. Like how we talk to some parents or some teachers rather, and they're like, in a room with 20 kids and all these kids are doing all sorts of crazy stuff. It's like spending 5 days a week doing that is not going to help the children actually learn anything, especially at a younger age. It's got to be, like you're saying, on an individual basis, because the parents understand what that child is going through. They understand why that child is acting that way, even if the parent is not well educated in understanding that, they're contributing to that and they can make a difference in that. But that's where we would come in. That's where what we
that's
do.
a matter of education for the
Exactly.
parents to start to understand that. And if you support them and then they start to change that, the child will have a better outcome, and the child will have a better footing when they become a parent to change even more. It will take generations.
Yeah.
But at the moment, the solution is, don't even worry about what parents are doing or not doing. Just throw them all in school eventually. Like,
Right.
So it's never going to be fixed.
Right.
And so now we're at the point where literally you don't even need educated people anymore to run the system,
yeah.
because you only need so many programmers. So they're literally just dumbing everybody down with critical race theory and fucking gender dysphoria and shit. Like, literally, they're like, you know what? That's going to be the curriculum now. Let's just make them all very sensitive to how other people feel and very susceptible to being shamed by social situations, so that they are manipulated. So when we put them into the metaverse, they'll play nice, because you can't have a bunch of, let me put it this way. If you put a bunch of like Gen Zs in the metaverse right now, it's going to be all a bunch of racist comments and like, you know what I mean? Like with each other and like all this other stuff. They're not going to play nice. So they need to dumb the kids down, so they're just like respectful of each other, because that's how you have a metaverse that you can control. Because think about
it's interesting.
If you have a bunch of edgy kids in there who are going to shit on corporate messaging because it's so cheesy and corny.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can't have that. You have to have docile, compliant people in those environments so that they won't question it whenever they're like, we've got the new, product that they're selling. You have to have everybody just complying with it. And that's the environment they want to create.
And they're using literally shame, like that point of shame, because shame is one of the hardest things, especially to stand up and stand out. It's like that feeling of just being socially shamed is so powerful that it's just like your father, Mitch, or like even just someone, even like my father, who was so hard to convince about like the pandemic was a lie. It's just like that point of just like not wanting to be the outlier or the, the black sheep or something. It's like that, and that is what they're now really obviously creating with these children. It's like, well, what are you creating for them as adults? Because remember back in like, I don't know, the 60s, 70s, 80s, it's like you always had like rebel people, but now it's like those same people, because of the way they're being indoctrinated, it's like they will never stand up. They will always be people who are docile, who will just abide by all whatever's being said, and then will definitely not change the system at all. So it's like right now we're in a point where like what we're doing with even within this group is so significant, because it's like this is our one and only chance to actually like get all the people who even have a chance of standing up and standing out. Because if we're going to wait for the next generation behind us, that is never going to freaking happen, because you're going to be so broken internally and have such low self-esteem. To get out of that like is going to be nearly impossible, because that's going to be like from the first 7 years of your life and your most like formative years.
That's such a great point. That's really a great point. We were talking with Christina and I were talking with someone yesterday, and we were just looking at this point of like, in order to go along with someone who's claiming that they're the opposite sex or gender or whatever, it's like you have to be a little bit absurd, and you have to be willing to go along with the absurd, right? And just looking at it in the context of what's so absurd is the like, if you look in the past, where we're talking about right now, how these kids are being developed to be really shamed and just go along with the system in general. If you look at the past, the way that people were set up to get to this point right now where we're at, you're looking at, okay, there were a bunch of women who, because that's what it seems like. I'm not really sure on what the specific statistics are, but it seems like the vast majority of people who are claiming to be transgendered or experiencing gender dysphoria, however you want to put it, they're mostly women, right? And if you look at the setup for it, it's like women were told that they were inferior, and they were told that in order to be equal, they needed to go out and get a job, become an entrepreneur, all this sort of stuff. And it's really sad and abusive when you look at it in a greater context, because a woman will get to like the age of 40 and not have anything going for her other than now she's got a business, is not very satisfied with it, perhaps doesn't even have a relationship, definitely doesn't have kids, right? And at this point in their life, it's too late. And that's it's fucked, because like a guy who's in his 40s could always marry somebody who's younger and start having kids. Like they don't have a problem with having or creating children, but the woman is not going to be capable, her body's not going to be as capable as it was when she was 20, 30, etc. You know? And so it's really interesting to see now how this whole questioning who you are, whether it be via, oh, I need to become an entrepreneur, or I feel like I'm a man, or even a man feeling like he's a woman, whatever, it's really stifling society in the way that, okay, you're not going to actually create anything of real value. Because think of like the most valuable thing that you can create is life. Like even if you build a business or whatever, it's like, okay, big whoop, right? The most valuable thing you can create is life. And in the greater context of not just creating a life, but creating life, and as in a child, with the understanding of considering life, considering like all that is life, and growing that. Because if you create a child that just destroys everything, you didn't create life. You created a virus, you know, but the virus would be of the mind, right? And that's essentially the society that we have today. That's what it creates, right? That's what the system is. The system is just a virus creating system. It's like what's live is the virus, and life is essentially has not had a chance to come through as of yet. And that's, I just wanted to bring that point across, because it's ratcheting up, you know. Okay, the last generation or whatever, we saw women getting to the point where they don't want to have kids, they just want to have careers, and then they get older and they're sad and they don't have anything. And then now it's a bunch of people who are transgender, and the shame is, if you don't agree with that, then you're a shameful person, or you should be ashamed of yourself rather. And then now it's getting to the point where it's like, you should be ashamed of not agreeing with anything that the system does, even if it makes no fucking sense whatsoever, even if it flip-flops back and forth from yesterday to today and back to what it was yesterday. You have no say, you have no brain, you just go along with what you're told. And if there is, it's almost like I don't remember exactly what the context for this was, but I remember in science, or I guess it would have been like in chemistry or something, learning about sort of like the cell walls. If you had too much sodium, let's say, on the outside of a cell wall, it would draw the water out. And then on the opposite end, like if there's too much sodium within the cell wall, it would draw water in, right? It's almost like we as people have become just, and I mean like the individuals in our society, but we've just become this, I don't know how it would be described, but we just want to agree with whatever the majority is saying. And so that would draw you across the barrier of rationale. It draws you across. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, it basically, okay, a man has a penis and has more testosterone in their bodies and however you want to describe it, right? And then the vast majority of people say, well, no, it's okay if that person is claiming they're a woman, then they're a woman. And it's like there's a certain tipping point where it's like, now there's more salt on this side of the barrier, and so you're drawn to that. It's like, oh, okay, all right, that's what we're going with. And I'm seeing that sort of interaction happening more and more and more at a greater scale. And that's what I think is the direction that our society is heading, is just, okay, wherever the corporation or the system puts the salt is where you'll be. Did that flow right?
Yeah. But I mean, think about it. It's not that anything has changed. It's just that now it's easier for people to be influenced, because you have you can put out a message and everybody gets it because everyone has a phone, but then also they can see everyone else getting it. And they can censor people who are, quote, not getting it. So when you go online, in a lot of cases now, it's like everybody agrees, the establishment anyways. And it's like, that doesn't mean everybody, but at the same time, the pressure is you don't know who does or doesn't. And if you question it, you'll be cut off, increasingly more and more, you'll be cut off from the social media or your bank or whatever the thing is, because you're not agreeing with it. It's like, go back. I mean, think about this. Like, how long have people believed in Christianity or God or anything like that? So people have always believed in retarded shit that doesn't make sense. I mean, like the Queen of England just died. Like, how many people fucking accepted that there's kings and queens?
Yeah.
Like, you're just accepting there's people who are they're just better than you. And like, it's really interesting watching people on Facebook. I saw somebody post a funny meme, and they said like, it was like, I forget what the meme was, but it was something poking at the point of like, it was like someone crying or whatever it was, or someone sad. And it was like, seeing all of my friends who I thought were woke posting about the Queen, being sad about the Queen dying or whatever. Right. And I was like, man, it's so true. Cause like, I saw that on my Facebook, people who are like in Neothink or whatever, like posting about like, rest in peace, Queen of England. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about, man? Like,
it just shows they can't process it.
Like,
that's crazy.
What? Like, how are you? And it's not about like I can empathize with that person. I understand, like, they're a human being. The Queen is not special, and the problem is thinking they are special, but acting like they're not. You know what I mean? Meaning, oh, they're just like everybody else, but then blaming them for all the problems. Yeah. And it's like, dude, imagine if you were born as the Queen of England. You know what I mean? And for her, being the Queen of England is no different than you being the fucking clerk at the grocery store.
I like the way
it's what she's programmed to do.
I like the way you say, dude, imagine if you were born as the Queen of England. Like, I'm sure a lot of guys can imagine
everything
if they were
is
born.
possible.
Yeah.
I just saw
You know-
one meme. It was so funny. I had to post it. It was like this WWE scene. Did y'all see that? And it was like this one guy was in this coffin, and then they're like announcing, and he like walks over, and the whole caption is like, "The Queen when Meghan Markle gives her final goodbye." And so like this guy comes over, and all of a sudden like he comes out of the grave, grabs him by the throat, and they're all like freaking out. And then he gets out of the coffin and throws the guy. I was laughing so hard at that. I mean,
That's hilarious.
R.I.P. Queen.
The whole thing is pretty absurd, know. And then like imagine, okay, here's the other thing that's really absurd about it is the UK is in a lot of respects leading the whole woke fucking thing now. Like when it comes to the pandemic, when it comes to the transgender, when it comes to the racism point, like they're more woke than the US. I mean, it's like it's a different type of it's a weird.
It's like woke spelled like WOUKE. I think that's how you spell
you have
it.
to put the U in it.
Luke.
It's weird when I'm just telling you my perception as an American looking at the UK. It's like there's this acceptance of authority at a very like fundamental level where it's like you have a queen and you have a system it's like when I look at UK, I'm like, that's 1984. Like they're literally 1984. And that's actually pretty funny. The UK is in the woke.
Yeah, we put the U in woke. That could be their new
That's pretty
tagline.
funny,
They could
actually.
pay me for that.
Yeah.
I can't hear you.
How do you come up
Hey,
with
Jess.
these?
How do I come up with
But
this?
it's
Yeah.
I'm actually what's it called?
AI.
Counterintelligence?
Oh.
What do they call it?
What intelligence?
something like that.
Counterintelligence?
See,
you wonder
guys,
where
you
the
look
CIA pays me
so
off?
official. Look at you.
Thanks, Des. I was thinking about you and Aristotle. I'm like, he's really cooking in there.
Oh my gosh, dude. I'm like the biggest.
No kidding. You can see it in your face too. It was
Oh,
made
are you
out
pregnant?
Yeah, it's
Any
fun.
moment now. Any moment.
I'm gonna later today or tomorrow, I'm gonna take a video of our bedroom. I've got it so decked out because like I thought I had it set up like 3 weeks ago, and now that I've been chilling in there for 3 weeks, it's been like, oh, I could do this. Oh, I could buy this. And yesterday I bought a snack shelf because snacks were like taking over my nightstand. So I have a whole shelf just dedicated to snacks. Like it's a whole thing. So I'm going
I
to take a
love
little
it.
video so people can see my setup.
I love
Jess
it.
made an
Cute.
actual birthing center in her bedroom.
Yes, I did. Okay.
It's true.
Amazing.
That's pretty cool, actually. Take it to the next level. Might as well.
Yeah.
That's
So
awesome.
I'm fully nested.
That's awesome.
Sick.
Wow.
Well, thanks for letting
Good.
me interrupt the.
She still brings me my coffee.
It's like every other
That's awesome.
episode I interrupt. Say hello.
We love it. We'll get it while we can.
We're just talking about how the UK is like the epitome of evil. That's all.
Oh, the
Yeah.
UK.
That's the center of woke. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
But
Oh,
that's why I
oops.
brought it
I
up.
was supposed to say that.
The reason I brought it up though is because like they're the center of woke, and yet they have a fucking monarch,
Mm.
which is like a genetically, and they're white, genetically transferred position of superiority.
Yeah, that's crazy.
They have a fucking white family monarch.
That's so funny.
And
Oh,
they're
I was
like,
at
but they're
Target.
super woke. And it's like, how do you handle and they're super like the people in Britain are super like like they're just it's like inborn to be a follower. It's so weird because the whole narrative is that they're the colonizers, but the actual British people are fucking like this slave mentality. It's so insane.
1984.
That's
So
what I'm saying.
I was at Target, and in the checkout line, they have all those magazines. And literally one of the magazines was talking about Princess Diana's death. And I was like,
I
what
know.
a
They're
interesting
still-
time to post that, because the queen just died. You'd think they'd be posting about the queen, but no, they're talking about
See,
how
they got you to talk about
Princess Diana died and how it was like mysterious and whatnot. And I'm like, that's just
And-
because she wasn't doing what the monarch wanted her to
Now
do.
we can finally
was a
look
me-
into it.
There was a meme of Princess Diana like at the gates of heaven, not letting the Queen of England in.
These memes are pretty good. They're pretty
Great, good to
good.
see you guys.
There was one meme I
Yeah.
saw where it was like the queen was like looking at herself in the mirror, but it was just this reptilian in the mirror.
That's an old one. That's an old one, Mitch.
This is super-
No, that was like an actual picture, I think.
yeah. Back. Hey, that was funny the other day, Cameron. You posted about the Great Reset, and it's getting fact checked now. It's like partially false, and you actually read the article, and it
Why don't they say partially true?
well, because it's the Great
Dude,
Reset.
I posted a picture of Max scooping cow feed into a bucket, and
I
I said
saw
Max
that.
is feeding the cow breakfast this morning, and it had a COVID-19 fact check, like, or not a
Yeah.
fact check, like a reminder about COVID. I'm like,
Yeah, like he's,
You had
he's
enough-
doing it on his own. It's like, oh, you know, Cameron's posting again. Just put a COVID-19, just anything. The algorithm
Isn't
is
that
just like
weird?
whatever he says, just put some kind of
Fact
fact check
checked.
on it. Yeah.
But like,
but I think it
actually,
has
like,
to do with maybe
that-
it's like promoting a homestead, maybe, or I don't know.
I don't know, maybe cow and COV,
Calvid.
like COVID. Yeah, I don't know, but like y'all, that's gonna happen more and more and more. That's why you gotta move yourself more efficiently and effectively.
It's almost like maybe they do it on random things just to get you used to just accepting that it's there.
probably,
It's always
and then
gonna be
everyone's like, "Oh, that thing again." Oh, so I have my team, all my TT guys. We're reading like a book every month, and then we're ramping that up. And right now we're reading Win Bigly by Scott Adams, because I read it a long time ago. I was like, y'all, this is some pretty cool analysis and talks about like influence and the media and everything. So it's cool to see, because like the first chapter in that book is called Persuasion in a World Where Facts Don't Matter. It's like really cool context for how, yeah, you can live in a world where it's like you have the current sitting president, however he quite got in there, still openly spouting this myth of like the whole, you know, Charleston thing. And it's and you can, it's like the mind is split. I mean, we're at the war for the mind. Let's just say it what it is. You know?
Yeah.
Hey, didn't we look at that article together about, it was like talking about Trump and like V for Vendetta? Were we looking at that together?
We were
Last week
Oh,
on
we
the
were looking at
podcast.
V for
Maybe-
Vendetta in the context of like the red background that Biden chose.
Oh,
for
yeah,
his
that's
speech.
funny.
Remember we saw that article and the guy was talking about, I don't know if I shared it with you guys. Maybe I was just looking at it with that and I didn't share it, but there was an article I found talking about like Trump, you know, and V for Vendetta and the parallels and everything. And it was like everything, it was like trying to make it that way. And I'm like, okay, I get it. But then it was funny because I saw a thing today. I think it was from, oh no, it was from the Dark Horse podcast. And they were talking about Biden's speech and V for Vendetta. And it was like a V, but I mean, like, is the person who wrote the article about Trump going to actually go and do the same analysis on that?
No.
Or is it like, no, it's only V for Vendetta if it's the person I don't like, but if it's the person I do like, oh, that can't be, even though it was like way more fucking obviously like very divisive speech and the red background and all that kind of stuff, you know?
Yeah.
It's just funny to me because
Divide and
like you
conquer.
said, the mind is
That-
split.
that-
It's like
that's
you
what,
can't see that.
yeah, that's what Gatto was talking about too. He's saying how they were reading Julius Caesar's Gallic War. And he's like, yeah, it's so obvious when you read it, even to these like middle school kids, where you see how it's a manual for how to take down a larger force. So if you're a smaller force, like the Roman Empire was, or the Roman military, I should say, against the Gauls, it's like how they could use divide and conquer very effectively against them. And then you hear Biden give this speech, and John Taylor Gatto's also talking about how Leviathan. He's like, it's so obvious. Like in all the elite families, they all read the Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes, and it's so clear in there. The messages, wherever you think there's power, wherever the you know everyone's looking at the spectacle, that is certainly where there's never the real power. So it's like Joe Biden giving his divisive speech. I mean, it's like textbook. Well, it should be the textbook. It's not the textbook because who wrote the textbooks?
It's like people got upset about it, about the speech. So that he's being divisive. And it's like, okay, you being upset was the point.
Exactly.
That was the point of it. And it's like, but they did it on purpose. They knew. And it's like, yeah. You know, it's like they're triggering you on purpose. They're wanting to create that that
fight in all of these points. I mean, I say they, it's really just the system, but and that's where the war for the mind point is. It's like, if you're not stable within yourself, you're so easily influenced one way or the other. I was actually wanted to tell you guys this cool story when we were talking about like the kids and all that. And what were we talking about at the very beginning? It was something that made me think about that. It was
Max is learning how to troll you.
no, it was like I was just thinking about his vocabulary. Oh, because we're talking about like the 9-year-old and the word problem and all that stuff. That's what it was.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because like it was either yesterday or the day before, like, you know, I think a lot of people know this. I don't know if I've talked about on the podcast, but like I have all these videos that I'll download on my computer and then I'll put them on the kids' computers, things from YouTube, generally speaking, where I'll like find stuff. And it's funny because like people will sometimes message me or like in our parenting group and they'll be like, you know, do you have any recommendations for videos for the kids? Because they find out that I do that, right? And it's like as if I have the go-tos. And it's like, no, I just look at stuff and I find stuff that might be interesting that's not impulsing a lot. You know, like sometimes I'll scan through a video and I see they've got lots of memes from The Simpsons and like to make the video funny. And I'm like, nah, no, I'm not going to use that video. You know, like if it's a math video, but they'll be like trying to make funny jokes and stuff. And I'm like, no, that's not what I want to impulse the kids with. So just, I'll look through it to make sure. And obviously with certain people that I've gotten things consistently from, I can see they don't do stuff like that. But anyways, I got Seneca asked me for more ballet videos because I had gotten her some ballet videos in the past and they were mostly clips of like a ballerina dancing or like a scene from like Swan Lake or something. And so I went and downloaded entire full-length ballets for her, like a few of them, like Coppelia, Swan Lake, Nutcracker, like a few others, right? And we'll talk about the stories and explain the meanings of different points and so forth. But she likes to watch those. And it, just as a side note, it's fascinating watching her dance now. Because like I put on some music last night. I put on Facebook a video of it. Like she will just bust out like ballet moves while she's dancing. Like just she'll be dancing to like pop music or like, you know, some random song. And she's like doing pirouettes and like arabesques and like all this stuff. It's just like, so it's cool to see that natural learning ability of her watching ballet videos and then just like not naturally in the sense of it happens naturally. It's just because of her natural ability is very open. She'll then just take that and use it. Anyway, so I was getting those videos for her. And I always like to, if I'm going to get videos for one of the kids, I get some for both of them. Right. And Max was really interested in the Riemann hypothesis. So I got some more videos about that. And the other day he was like sitting down and he was watching one of these videos and he's like, Cameron, come sit and watch with me. So like I went into the living room with him. We sat on the couch and like watched the video and we're like pausing it. Right. And they're doing like these things called series, which is like when you add up a bunch of numbers. Right. And I would stop and explain to them because they'd be like, this is equivalent to this. And I would stop and we would talk about why is it equivalent to that? Because they would be like factoring something out or whatever. So we would sit there and talk about it. And it's like, you know, I'm having this discussion about which is like something you wouldn't study until junior year of high school, at least, you know, and most people probably don't even remember that, like sequences and series and things like that. Right. And even and then in calculus, you study it. And whereas, and I'm not saying there's a lot of building blocks he still doesn't have, you know, and so it's more like it's fun for him to watch it, but there is a lot he processes that even the adults aren't going to process who would apparently have the building blocks, even though they actually don't. And so he likes that stuff. And it's interesting because like we don't dumb things down. So like we don't get him the book about biology or about evolution. It's like we would just get the origin of the species. I'm not that we have that book. I'm just saying, like, as an example, I don't get the book about something. It's like where they're like dumbing it down or giving you their version of it. It's like, let's just read the actual thing. You know what I mean? So it's like they have kids encyclopedias they read, you know, and again, everything has context and everything is edited to a certain degree. I understand that, but it's like somebody might ask me, what's a good video about math for kids? And it's like, the problem is if you get a video about math for kids, it's so limited and dumbed down because they know the kid can't process certain things. And it's usually, it's overly stimulating so that the kids will want to watch it. So he watches mostly videos that are made for adults, which doesn't mean that has immature or what we would call mature content, obviously, that we wouldn't put something like, especially graphic type stuff or violent stuff, but adult meaning it's like at adult level of vocabulary. So we don't dumb it down. Anyway, it's just really fun watching him like develop that point. And so we went to the playground. I wanted to tell 2 stories. So we went to the playground twice, once on Friday and then once on Saturday. I took the kids to the playground in town. And the first day we went, and they like to go because there'll be other kids there sometimes, right? And like in our town, there's not usually a lot of kids at the playground. There'll be some, like a few here and there. And so we'll play, and then there'll be some kids, and then I'll kind of like back off and let them play with the kids. And then when there aren't kids, I'll play with it, And so when there are kids there, I'll kind of back off. So because I know a lot of times the other kids are not going to be comfortable with an adult playing with them per se, or maybe the parents wouldn't be, whatever, but I'll just kind of back off and let them play a little bit. And I'll only intervene if I feel like it's necessary, right? Or I see it's necessary. So anyways, we're at the playground the other day, and this girl comes with her mom, and the girl, I think she was like 7 or 8 years old. And the mom sits down on the bench and immediately on her phone, and the little girl goes and she just sits on one of those little like rocking horse things, with the springs, on the playground, and she's sitting there. And then she goes and sits on the slide. And I told the kids, I said, look, there's another kid there. Because I was playing with the kids at the time. And I said, there's another kid here. Why don't you go introduce yourself and see if she wants to play? So they were like, oh, because I guess they weren't really paying attention that she had showed up, right? So then they immediately went over to her. And then the little girl kind of like got up and like went back close to her mother and sat on like the thing. And the kids came over and they were like, Max was like, why isn't she playing with us? And I said, maybe she's shy. And they understand what that means, that it's a program, right? And I said, maybe she's shy. Maybe you have to just be a little bit more gentle in the way you approach it, and more like just friendly and not try to be too aggressive or whatever within like saying play with me or whatever. Just try some different things. So they went over there, and then the girl wasn't really responding. It was just like, almost at first I'm like, maybe this kid's like severely autistic or something, even though she didn't look like it,
Mm-hmm.
Well, anyways, she's about, 10 feet from her mom. So they're very close together. The mom's on the bench. And Max starts if the kid doesn't play with him, he'll just immediately talk to the parents. Right. So he starts talking to this mom. Right. And she's like he's saying, I forget what he exactly was saying to her, but he's like, he was trying to talk to the daughter. And I think the reason why he started talking to the mom was because she said, oh, she's really shy. Right. So I said, see, that's what I was looking at. Anyway, so then Max starts talking to the mom, right? And he's like, how old are you? Right. And the mom goes, old enough. And he's like, how old are you? And she's like, old enough to know, like, hey, you're old enough to know you shouldn't be asking people like that. And she looked at him, she goes, Dad, Dad, like, what, and I just looked at her like, what? And Max goes, well, but how old are you? And she was like, boy, I'm old enough. Right. Like in this program of like, you're not supposed to ask a woman her age kind of thing. Right. Like
Sure.
It's offensive or some shit. Right. But it's cool because like Max is at the age where I don't need to step in and defend him now. You know what I mean? Like he's not, you can tell he's not being influenced by that. Like if he was younger,
Yeah.
I would have immediately been over there. Like, but I'm kind of letting him navigate that point. Right. And so he's like, well, how old do you think I am? Right. And she's like, well, I think you're 6. And he's like, how do you know that? Why do you think that? Because he's 5, right? He's like, well, you still have your baby teeth. You're about that height or whatever. He was like, okay. He goes, and then he starts asking her some other question, like, what is your job? Like, what do you do? How do you make money? Like, what do you have? What's your job? And she's like, wow, you're nosy. And he goes, what? He goes, the girl said something about she's 7. And the mom started saying something to the girl, and Max was like, something about school. Oh, no, she said, oh, no, that's what it was. The mom said, why aren't you in school right now? You're nosy. Why aren't you in school? Shouldn't you be in school right now? And like just being really like standoffish, right? And Max was like, well, no, I don't go to school. I'm homeschooled. And she goes, oh, I can tell. You don't know how to communicate with people.
Wow.
Right? And Max was like, you're very rude. Right? He's like, you're being very rude. And like the mom kind of didn't respond to that. And then eventually it's like she got up because I guess maybe the daughter moved away, and Max kept talking to the mom. And then like the mom got up and went over to the other side of the playground where the daughter was playing on the slide. And Max went over there, right? So I'm kind of like, I'm there, but not, I'm like kind of in the background, right? Because I don't want to interfere. I want to see what Max is doing with it, right? And he's talking to her some more. And like, and Max is in this mode of like, now this person is showing that they're being very rude to me. So I'm going to show them that they're being rude. That's what he does. Like, he'll be like, I'm not going to let you not acknowledge this point, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, because he got her to tell her she works in a coffee shop. That's what it was. He was like, okay. And then he was like, you're being very rude to me. And she was like, well, I think you're being rude. And he goes, yes, we're both being rude. He's like, but I'm only being rude because I have to now. Right. And so it was just, oh, and then there was a point she goes, boy, she was like, don't you know not to talk to strangers? And he goes, I'm not afraid to talk to anyone. Right. And then she was like, I could be an axe murderer. Right. And then when she said that, I got up and I looked at him and I said, Max, that is not nice of her to say. Like, she's doing a joke right now. That's very spiteful. Right. And the mom just kind of like started looking at her phone. Right. And I was like, she's just not understanding you and how to communicate with you, because, we talked about like parents who you mostly have to have their kids in school. They don't know how to interact with kids who actually know how to communicate. So they're just trying to treat you like they treat their kids. Right. And then, so I'm not worried about the mom at this point. I'm just talking with Max and I said, do you understand what she meant by an axe murderer? And he's like, what is that? And I said, like a person who hurts people with an axe. And I said, why would a person like that be at a playground? Right? Why would they be talking to you right now? She's just saying that so you won't talk to her anymore. Right? She's just trying to use fear. And he was like, well, now I need to be more rude to her. And I was like, Max, it's not going to be effective. Can you see, like, she doesn't want to talk. Right. So, and I said, and he's like, yeah, she works in a coffee shop. And I was like, she's not very well educated, Max. Like, she's not understanding how to communicate with you. When she said you don't know how to communicate, the reality is she doesn't. And he's like, so we were having this conversation about it, right? And then later I was explaining to him, like, actually that was a different conversation. I'll talk about that in a moment. So I stepped in when I saw the point where this is a point that was being used where he wouldn't have the context, that he needed some support with the point, right? And he didn't go into any fear about it. It was just like, okay, now playtime's over. Mom's actually trying to harm my child. Now I'm not gonna worry about her. You know what I mean? Like, if she's offended if I say something, like, I'm gonna now talk to my child and give context, right? So that's what I did. And it was cool because we were talking about it, and I was like, do you notice how in the beginning you guys were saying how the girl wasn't talking to you? And I said, maybe she's shy, right? And then what was the first thing the mom said when you went over there? And they were like, oh, that she's shy. And I said, why do you think that is? And he was like, oh, because she's impulsing people not to talk to strangers. You see, because like that's what she was doing with him, right? So we were discussing. So like when these points come up, it's like either we're just having a friendly, normal interaction with people, or something spiteful fucking happens, which is inevitably happens because people are so fucking spiteful to children, and without even realizing it, they're super spiteful. And like, I know, Mitch, you're about to have a kid. Ask if that's a kid now. It's like you start to see this more when you're aware, like we are, within all of the points that we're here that we talk about, we share about. When you're looking at things from this perspective, you start seeing the spitefulness more and more, like just very subtle stuff that people say, people do. It's like always constantly trying to undermine the innocence of the child, to try to turn them into something that's hateful, fearful, whatever, right? And so anyways, it was a really cool example, because at that one point where Max, when he said to her, he was like, I'm not afraid to talk to anyone.
Yeah.
It was just so cool, And it's like, you could see the difference with how the daughter was interacting. Because like, eventually the daughter started talking. Like as Max started talking to the mom, the girl became more like talkative to the kids. But it was still kind of in the conversation with the mom. It was like she felt safe talking when the mom is talking, and so you could see this whole pattern. And I don't think she was autistic. It was just like she was.
Well, if you have a mom like that,
to not,
yeah.
you could see it exactly.
Yeah,
you could see the whole pattern. Okay, so then it was interesting because then the next day they wanted to go back to the playground again, and we had a really fun time in town. So we went back yesterday, which was Saturday, and when we went to the playground yesterday, when we got there was already not a lot of kids, but probably like 5 kids there of different ages. And there were these 2 girls that were probably like, 9 or 10 or something, or 12, I don't know. up in this tree, up in a pear tree. And it was a pear tree that the day before, when no one was there, we were like throwing sticks trying to knock pears down. And I told the kids, when we go to the playground, we can get some more pears down, right? And so, but since there were kids there, I was just sitting back watching the kids play and let them go play with the kids while the kids were there, because usually they'll leave and then I can play with them, right? And so Max went over to the pear tree because he wanted to do the pears. He was really excited about that, trying to knock the pears down. He was trying to tell these girls that he wanted to knock the pears down, but they didn't want to come out of the tree. So he came back to me and said, these girls are being very rude to him. And I was like, well, what's the context? So he explained to me, like, I'm trying to get the pears, but they won't get down. And I was like, well, look, they were already in the tree. You're wanting to do that. I understand. Because he said what they told him was, he said, I told him, like, because they said that you shouldn't do that. And he was like, well, my dad was doing it with me yesterday. And he was like, well, he's an adult. You're not an adult. So they were trying to use that as to like the negotiation, instead of just being clear, like, we're playing right now and like we don't want to get down, which would have been fine, right? So I was explaining to him, like, look, you're not really persuading them. You guys are just arguing about it. Maybe in this context, just go and be friendly with them and play. And then eventually they'll get down. I'm sure they'll have to go. And then we can do the pairs. Like, just don't worry about doing it right this moment. You're creating a conflict that doesn't need to be there. Or you could just try to persuade them, right? So we went back and tried to talk to them. And then at a certain point, he got the stick and was just trying to throw the pairs himself, because clearly he couldn't get the girls to get down. And this was after one of the girls had already left with her mother. The other girl was still sitting in the tree, right? And the girl like immediately got down and went to her parents and said that Max was throwing sticks at her, which was not true. That's how she thought was happening. But she went over and talked to her parents, and I was just listening, right? And they didn't really seem to care. Then the girl came over to me and she said, your son's throwing sticks at me. And I said, Max, come here, please. Right. And then I said, is that what was happening? And he was like, well, not exactly. He's like, I was trying to hit the pairs. Right. But the girl had already left. So then I explained to him, I was like, look, can you see in that context, that's not best, because if the person's in the tree and you're throwing sticks, they might be afraid they could fall. Right. That's not best. Right. But you're not also communicating clearly with them. Right. So it was interesting because there was this slight conflict where the girl was trying to tell on Max with her parents, right? And it was interesting because the parents were like, well, and then Max went over there. He's like, not afraid. He went over there with her. And they were like, well, what are you trying to do? And he's like, I'm trying to get the pairs down. And she's like, whoa, well, she's not in there now. Go over there. You can do it. And they were like, they were trying to tell the girl, like, stop complaining about it. It was like they were not even defending, not that you should defend someone just because they're a child, but it's like they weren't even interested in like finding out, like, why are you upset about this? Why are you disturbed by it? What's the real story, right?
Yeah.
And so it was really interesting because it was like the girl didn't have anyone to like listen to her from that perspective, right? And the parents were just wanting to talk to themselves. The kids go play, right? And I could see Max over there talking with them. And there was a certain point where like there was maybe some dog poop or something on the ground. I think she stepped in it. She was trying to clean her shoe off or whatever. And they were like, go and play. And she was like, well, I got dog poop on my shoe. And they're like, oh, okay, well, we'll get out of here and go play. Go clean it off and don't quit stepping in the poop. Like they were like mad at her, just like the way they were just generally treating her,
Yeah.
And there was a certain point where it was like she didn't want to go. I didn't know exactly what was happening, but because I didn't hear this part, but they were saying something about they were going to spank her. And I didn't really hear why. And I don't even know if it was necessarily if they're serious about it. Regardless, it's irrelevant. But eventually Max comes over to me and he goes, those parents are really not, they're being very spiteful to their child. And I'm going to stop them. And I was like, well, hold on, what's going on? He's like, they're saying that they're going to spank her. I'm like, what do you mean? Why are they going to do that? And then he was like, he didn't know why, right? And then he goes, so then he goes away for a bit. And he comes back and he goes, all right, I was really rude to those parents because they were going to spank their child. And I was like, what do you mean you were rude to them? He goes, well, I said something that they don't like. And I was like, what did you say? And he goes, well, I said to them, how you're going to spank your child? And they're like, yeah. And he said, well, you believe in God, right? And they were like, yeah. And he goes, well, God said, give as you want to receive, right? So you shouldn't take your child.
That's awesome.
And he was coming back to tell me that that's how he was rude to them. Because his definition of rude is not being mean to somebody per se. It's like you're saying something they don't want to hear. You know what I mean? Necessarily, right?
Yeah.
So it was just really interesting. And I didn't need to step in because the parents were not being aggressive with him. And even though I wouldn't tease the kids like this, they were just doing it in a teasing way with the kids. So it wasn't like they were actually in any way going to be aggressive or actually do anything bad, like from that perspective. Problem is, like, if you want to prevent your child from being exposed to anybody like that, you just have to like totally isolate them.
Yeah.
So like when the kids were very little, we were very much more, you could say, protective of them and who was talking to them. And I would step in much earlier. But as Max has developed his vocabulary more, it's like, I'll give more leeway. If it's Seneca, it's a little different still. I'll step in more and so forth. But it was just really interesting seeing how he interacts with people now. And he does not have that sense of shame. It's just like people can say anything to him, and I know they're trying to shame him. He just doesn't respond to it. It's like if you're wearing a hat and somebody came into me and they were like, "Wow, look at you wearing a hat outside." You might just be like,
yeah.
"Okay." I can't even think of an example, because even then you might feel like you're supposed to be ashamed. It's just like, it's like he doesn't even recognize it as there's something that you should be shamed about. It's like he doesn't care about that. It's like we've never used that. So he's at the age now where it's like we always go back to the computer example. It's like when you're developing the operating system, it's like it's already got Windows on it. You could try to put a Mac program on it, it's not going to run.
Right. Yeah.
So his vocabulary is at the point now where it's like the base level of it is set to where shame is not one of those programs. That doesn't mean I would abuse that and then try to use it anyways and see. No, but I'm saying it's just not there. What were you going to say?
It's really cool because like it just shows that shame is something that you have to be taught at home, like, or at least within your first, first developing years. That's something you have to learn in order for it to be used effectively later on. And so, going back to like, what is the system? It's like you shaming your child is part of the system. That it's a very key component of how the system can even operate,
all those points that the system will use to manipulate you later on through emotional manipulation with politicians based on feelings and love and hope and all this shit.
Yeah.
If you're not impulsing your I even hesitate to say the word hope. Like, not that we don't use the word in context, but I won't be like if I said to the kids, "Man, I really hope it doesn't rain today." Like, I might say something like that. We all say things like that, but I'll be like, "Of course, you guys understand that me saying it hope is irrelevant, right?" Like, I would always correct the point so they know, like, it's just an expression. It's more just me expressing that there's something I want to happen that
you'd prefer that it doesn't rain.
Like, rain would disrupt that thing I want to do. It's not me actually hoping like it's going to change something, right? So we talk about these points, right? And what were you going to say? It's not like you were going to.
I was just going to say that point of like, because you're kind of starting off with, it's the points that the system will use later on. And I just see how so many parents are completely unaware that these things exist within themselves and their child. They don't even realize that the reason why they're shaming their child is because they were shamed when they were older, or when they were younger, rather. Like, they don't realize that they are still participating in what was done to them, and they're doing that to their children. I just wanted to bring
But also their starting point is to control the child instead of educate them properly.
But also, why do they want to control them?
They want to control them because, well, okay, let me give you some perspective. As maybe you're asking rhetorically, but I'll just give my
I was asking rhetorically.
Okay. Yeah.
I was asking. But go ahead with your explanation.
But as a parent, for those who are not parents, the reason why parents want to control their kids is because you don't actually see your child as another equal being that it's your responsibility to support to be the very best that they can be. You actually see your child as an inconvenience that you are taking responsibility for,
Obligated to take care of.
You're obligated to, and then you use things like love as the way to motivate yourself within it. Like, because that's really what it comes down to. It's like if you're in a relationship with someone like I have with Katie, you don't need love to do what is best. Like I don't need a feeling of love for her to, if she's really tired because she was up all night with Caius, like take the kids and let her rest or something. I don't need a feeling of love. That's a practical point. It's what I would want. And there are those times where I need the nap, and then she would do that for me. But you don't need a love. But if you're not programmed, or you haven't programmed yourself to make decisions based on just practically what is the best thing that affects everybody that you're affecting, then you need some kind of feeling type motivation to do it. So the parents have this love for their child that motivates them. The problem with that is it only half works. It only works to the degree that you'll make sure your child's fed. You'll make sure they go to school. You make sure they brush their teeth, but it's all done in a way where you use fear, you use punishment, and you can justify it because you love them. So it's okay if I abuse my child because I also love them. Same thing, we see this pattern in religion. Same thing with the system itself. Like the system is super fucking abusive to us. I'm blaming it. It's like we're participating in it, but it's like, look, it takes our life when we could be creative and having amazing lives together, and it pits us against each other, and it wastes our creative potential. And we basically spend most of our lives relatively suffering in misery and few moments of joy. And but we get the holidays and we get these great times and stuff like that. And it's like, you see what I mean? It's like the same point. And as a parent, my process has really been realizing the points where, like there's this bullshit parents say of like, which it's like, I'm trying to think of how it's expressed. It's like, children have so much to teach us, and sometimes as the parent, the child is guiding me.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's not really accurate. Like, here's really what's going on. Sometimes I'll, as a parent, do things out of, I don't know if I want to use the word laziness. It's more just like, I'm not going to put the energy forth to give to my child the environment that they really deserve. To when I say deserve, I mean as to give them the best foundation, right? Like, let's say it's really late. I'm super tired. The kids want to play. And it's like, I really just want them to go to sleep because I need to get some sleep because I got to get up early tomorrow. So let me just, come on, guys. It's time to go to bed. Like, no, I don't want to read that book right now. Just get in bed, just lay down. Like, if you were on the receiving end of that, like what kind of a person are you going to develop into?
Yeah. It'd be like, wow, this
someone easily frustrated.
Yeah. Yeah.
And imagine the person who's like, okay, I'll get in bed. Like, who is that person that's doing that?
Yeah.
And so whenever I do that to my children, and then I have the self-awareness to see myself doing it, you know what I immediately feel?
Shame?
Bad.
Yeah, ashamed. Like, I feel ashamed of what am I creating?
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay. So my process as a parent is not I let my children guide me and all this bullshit. It's seeing the points where I could potentially feel ashamed or do feel ashamed, which was the mistake I already made. And then I look at, okay, why am I feeling ashamed in this point? Like, what is it that I'm creating that I see is not best, which is why I'm feeling ashamed? Because it's like there was a time where I remember there was a few nights where Seneca would ask me to read a book, and it's like already late. It's already like that time where they would normally fall asleep or get ready to fall asleep. And she'd be like, can you read this other book? And I'd be like, no, I'm reading this book out loud. This is the book we're reading right now. And just lay down. It's time for you to go to sleep, right? And then there was one night where I was like, well, because I saw this point within her where she was like, okay, like not, I'm even exaggerating the way it was expressed. It was just very subtle of like an acceptance of like, okay. And I was like, it's not what I want to create in her. Not even as a preference. It's just not best. So I was like, oh, you know what? Yeah, let's read it. Because my projection is, well, we're never going to go to bed.
Yeah.
But it was like, then she snuggled up next to me. We read the book. How is that different than I was reading another book?
Right.
And then afterwards, she like got back in her bed and fell asleep. And then it was cool because then after that, not every night, but a few nights, she would then feel okay with asking me, hey, can we read this book, this other book? And there was one night where she was really unstable and she was like crying and like kind of like doing tantrums, not wanting to go into bed. And I was just like, let me hold you. So I like held her and kind of like danced with her a little bit. And then she calmed down. And then I was like, can I put you in the bed? And she said, yeah. And I put her in the bed. She fell asleep. After that, every so often, before she falls asleep, she'll be like, Cameron, can you hold me? And I would be like, sure. And I would get up and I would hold her for a little bit. And then I would put her in the bed. And it wasn't like she was doing a tantrum or anything. It was just like, she would ask me. And I was like, okay, like that's actually pretty cool that she would now ask me to do that. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
it's really beautiful, like it's what parents want. They want those moments, but it's like you were saying earlier, you have these moments very far apart from each other, right?
let me interrupt you on that point. It's like, I wasn't really trying to emphasize that point. Like, I understand what you mean about the beautiful part. Like, I
I'm
get
just
that.
saying,
Like,
but that's something that a lot of parents like strive for, that they want. That's
right.
what they
but here's my point, though.
grandize. Yeah.
But even my point is, eventually you have that experience several times, unless you're deliberately participating in those emotions. It's just an experience of just you're holding the kid so they can fall asleep. So I'm going to keep doing it when she asks me, even if it's not, I feel like, oh, wow, my daughter wants me to hold her or something. My point was just like being able to give in that moment, to adjust myself and be like, hold on, why am I projecting that they're not going to go to bed and they're never going to fall asleep if I pick her up and hold her? She's just going to ask me to do it every night. Like, it's just one example. And in the beginning, I would want them to just go and lay in their beds, and she would want to come sit with me on the couch, on the little love seat. Not love seat, like is that what the single one's called? Whatever, like the little chair, sofa chair.
Yeah, chair
in their room. And she would come sit with me, and then she would want to come sit for a little bit and look over my shoulder. I'd be like, okay, now it's time to go back in your bed. And she would go back, and then she would want to come back and sit, and we do that a little bit. And now it's just, I don't worry about that. So they feel comfortable just getting out of the bed and coming and sitting with me for a moment if they want to, and then they go back in their bed. So I'm not like fighting it, like trying to control their behavior. It's just a simple illustration of the point of like, as parents, we tend to only focus on what's convenient and what fits into our system that we already have of our life and how we want things to be. And we're not really considering the child at all, to the point where it's like they put children in cribs, and they don't pick up children when they cry, And I saw this video recently, someone posted. It was a pretty cool video because it was talking about when you let your child cry it out, like it actually damages their brain, which is why we never did that. And it was saying, like, if you don't pick up your child when they cry, it teaches them that there won't be someone there to pick them up when they need it. And I was like, now that's an interesting point, though, because I do agree, if your child's crying, especially if they're young, little, you should pick them up and find out what the issue is. When they're 3 years old, that's like when they're 2-ish, 3, that's when we started explaining to our kids, I'm not going to pick you up right now, but what do you need? And like, I'm not always going to pick you up just because you're crying. Now you're going to have to learn to communicate with me. Why don't you try if you're just wanting me to pick you up, just tell me you want me to pick you up. Let's start practicing using words as communication rather than just crying. Because the thing is, imagine from their perspective, crying is how they communicate. And then they start transitioning into being able to speak, and they don't realize they don't need to use that communication. It's just it's an automatic thing. So you have to teach them, you don't have to cry. But now imagine you start punishing them for the crying. Use your words. Come on, stop crying. It's like, what kind of a person are you creating by doing that? Instead of so the parent has to have a lot of patience not to put their irritation and their frustration into the character of the child. And so, just as a final point, everything, and this is why I was saying with John Taylor Gatto, the teacher is not the solution in the school, because all of the fundamental education of the child, the way they respond to life, their fundamental character, is developed by the parent in those first 7 years. Because up to that point, I mean, it's like that's how they learn their base emotional response to reality, and how you communicate. And so as a parent, if you're like, yeah, but it's so challenging because like they don't have words at that stage, that's why you should use TechnoTutor and get the symbols in quicker and more effectively, because then you'll have what we have, which is children who can communicate far more effectively at a younger age where they can be reasonable. So if, for example, it's a very late night and I'm very tired, I can say to my kids, look, guys, I'm not trying to control like the bedtime right now and make it uncomfortable for you guys, but I just want you to know I'm really, really tired. I don't feel well tonight. And, you know, let's all cooperate together, and I'm going to read and I'm going to be here with you guys. But if you can just understand how I'm feeling right now, because I'm very tired and I need to get some rest, then let's just work together. So I'll communicate that with them. Now I know they're not necessarily going to be able to empathize yet, but at least as I start communicating it, they can start responding to it. Do you see what I mean? Of like, okay, well, maybe we can be a little bit more flexible. They can be more flexible, but I also understand the responsibility is on me as the parent, right? So that relationship we develop, the communication, the vocabulary and so forth, that can't be done in school. By then it's way too late, you know, and that's really what the responsibility of the parent is. Do you guys have any final points you want to add? Or I know, Mitch, you have to go.
I was just gonna say, when when you're now like letting Max loose at the playground like that, I mean, I know within reason, of course, but it's kind of cool. It reminds me of like when you're building a child's immune system. It's like initially right away, you do have to be conscientious of it. And then over time, though, you can get them a little more exposure, and it actually strengthens them. So that's just really cool to see. And it makes me even more excited being a parent of looking at how can I really set up my kid to be ready by the time they are going to go into the world, where they have the greatest foundation, right? They have the great support network. They have that stability, but then, yeah, going into the world where it's just totally different than I had as a kid. When I was a kid,
Like, don't you want
ugh.
it's like, it's not that I want my children to dominate people. That's not the goal. The goal is equality. But the problem is people are they're programmed currently to respond to dominant people.
Mhm.
So if they're going to stand in a point of inequality anyways, do you want your child to be the one who just feels too ashamed to even direct people, or is like, you know what, I'm going to direct people, I'm not going to be ashamed of it, but the responsibility as the person being directive is to support them to be directed back to what is the actual solution so they can become equal. And that's what we instill within our kids. We're not just saying you're smarter than everybody, you can go dominate them. That's not the point. It's to let him practice talking to adults to the point where, imagine as a 5-year-old, you're not afraid of any adult. Imagine when you're 15 or when you're 12 or 30, the ability you're going to have to influence, and you're being instilled with principles to understand what your responsibility is to others, to support them to be lifted up as well. And that's really what it comes down to, because if you don't educate your child in this way now, they're just going to be one of the people who, the actual dominant people in this world, who are not educated to consider everyone equally, like the Queen of fucking England. They're just going to then treat you like you're an inferior, and they're not going to in any way support and lift people up.
Yep.
That's what we're here to do as parents and as educators, right? Any final thoughts, Drake? See God?
Hang on, Drake, you're muted.
Drake's muted.
I was just saying, I think that's a great wrap up of like, that's exactly what we're here to do. Is you're instilling your children with these principles of their responsibility to others. And that's what our responsibility is as well. That's why we're here. That's why we make this. That's what we're doing is, hey, if you can hear this, it's time to develop yourself more. And yeah.
We've got, just real quick before we end, so right now this is live in the Self-Perfected group. If you're watching this, and we're having a parenting group meeting in about an hour from right now, and you have to have Technotutor to be in there. But if you do, and you're interested in parenting and getting support about education, also if you're just interested in it for yourself as your own parent, that's a great place. Like, it's not just for parents. We talk about a lot of really cool stuff in there. So we have a lot of really cool support groups. So my point is to become a part of the group. Like, our group is growing every single day. It's cool seeing new people come in, and you see people getting it faster and faster and faster. Yeah. So that's why when I talk about myself as a parent, I'm not like, oh, I'm learning so much from my kids. Like, I'm in a process of experiencing either preemptively changing or feeling ashamed of like, oh, I fucked that up. Okay, let me correct that and so forth. But the quicker you get this and start walking this process, you can learn from our mistakes and so forth, right? And that's why we have these support groups and Self-Perfected. But really, to go even deeper, to have Technotutor and so forth, that's really where you want to go, because we can go. It's not that we want to hold things back. It's just, if you don't have Technotutor, you're just going to short circuit when we talk about shit that's actually real, because you're not going to have the ability to change it. And when you, so it's like this, just to wrap up what we were talking about earlier with people, when you have that cognitive dissonance come up and you don't have the tools of change, like one of you said, you're not really making a choice. You're just going to choose, go back to the system and suppress all the points. But when you have the point, and at least even if you got it like today and you're like, at least I have this tool, you're like, okay, this is making no sense. I have all this cognitive dissonance. How do I support myself with this tool that I know can support me to change? And that's why, like in our more exclusive groups, people who have Technotutor, we can push a little bit more in terms of going deeper within parenting and self, call it self-improvement, but really your own process of changing yourself. We can push further because we know that you have the tools to change yourself, and you have an option of not just reacting and going further into your own delusional points, right? So join us. We're
Yeah.
moving.
Right.
Bye,
See you
everybody.
guys. Bye.
Cool.